The day I found out about her affair was the day I stopped caring. Not in the way weak men do, wallowing in self-pity, drinking themselves into oblivion, or begging for answers. No. I stopped caring about her, about the life I had built with her, about anything except what needed to be done. My name is Curtis Boone. I'm 52 years old, and I make my living guiding people through places that could kill them if they weren't paying attention. Out here in Montana, the wilderness doesn't lie. It doesn't make excuses. It just is. You respect it or you don't make it out. I was raised by a man who understood that. My father taught me how to track, how to hunt, how to move through the trees without making a sound. He also taught me to recognize a trail long before most people knew they were leaving one. That's how I knew Amy was cheating before I ever found the proof. It started small. A change in her scent, something synthetic and floral, like she was trying too hard. A new energy in her voice when she talked, like she was laughing at things I wasn't a part of. Then came the absences, trips to Bozeman for self-care days, staying late at the gym, leaving her phone face down when she used to leave it wherever. I didn't say anything. I just watched. You don't rush a shot until you have the full picture of your target. The proof came easy. People who lie always leave something behind. A crumpled-up hotel receipt under the seat of her car, 2 names on the reservation, Ryan Parker. I ran the name through my head, searching for where I'd heard it before. Took about 5 seconds to place it. Park ranger. Yellowstone. Met her last summer during a hiking trip when she needed to clear her head. I should have seen it then, but I was still giving her the benefit of the doubt. That was my mistake. I could have gone home and confronted her right then. Raised my voice, demanded answers. But I don't waste energy on pointless fights, and I don't give people the satisfaction of seeing me react. Instead, I drove home, made dinner like nothing was wrong. Amy walked in an hour later, flushed and smiling, dressed like she had somewhere important to be. She barely glanced at me when she set her gym bag down by the door. "Good day," I asked, keeping my voice even. She hesitated just for a fraction of a second. "Yeah, just a long one." I watched her move around the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water, looking anywhere but at me. That's when I knew she wasn't just cheating, she was lying to herself, too. "You smell different," I said, not accusing, just stating a fact. That got her attention. Her head snapped up, starting to me before she forced a laugh. "New detergent." I nodded like I believed her, then went back to eating. She didn't say much after that. Guilt changes a person's behavior more than they realize. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept, breathing slow and easy like she had nothing to worry about. I thought about what my father would have done. Not yell, not threaten. He would have handled it like he handled everything, methodically, patiently, making sure that when he took his shot, he never had to take another. I wasn't just going to leave. That would have been easy for her, maybe even a relief. No, I was going to make sure she understood what she'd thrown away. And I was going to make sure that Ryan Parker, whoever he thought he was, paid for stepping into a life he had no business being in. The next morning, I was up before dawn, same as always. Routine keeps a man steady. I brewed my coffee, black and strong, then stepped outside onto the porch. The air was sharp, the kind that cuts through your lungs and reminds you you're still alive. Boomer sat beside me, ears twitching, eyes locked on the tree line like he sensed something was off. Maybe he did. Dogs don't ignore their instincts the way people do. Inside, I could hear Amy moving around, her usual routine. She'd shower, spend too long getting ready for someone who supposedly had no plans, then linger in the kitchen, scrolling her phone like she was waiting for something. Or someone. I stayed where I was, sipping my coffee, letting her believe I was lost in my own world. That was the thing about Amy, she never really saw me. Not the way I saw her. She stepped out onto the porch, hair still damp, wearing one of those expensive athleisure outfits that weren't made for anything but being looked at. "Heading out early?" she asked, casual, like I didn't already know where she was going. "Got a private client today. Teaching a guy how not to get himself killed in the woods." I took another sip of coffee, watching her from the corner of my eye. "You?" She hesitated just long enough to confirm what I already knew. "Just the gym. Might grab lunch with Lisa." Lisa. The same friend she always used when she needed a convenient alibi. I nodded, letting her think I bought it. "See you later then." She lingered for a second, maybe expecting more from me. When I didn't give it, she gave a tight smile and walked back inside. I heard the front door shut not long after. I waited exactly 5 minutes before walking inside, setting my mug down, and grabbing my keys. By the time I pulled out onto the road, I was 3 cars behind her. Far enough to be unnoticed, but close enough that she wasn't going anywhere without me knowing. She didn't go to the gym, didn't go to lunch with Lisa. Instead, She drove straight through town, past the usual spots, heading toward the outskirts. My grip tightened on the wheel, but I kept my breathing steady. No surprises here. She was just confirming what I already knew. She pulled into a small lodge near the river, the kind of place tourists rent when they want to feel like they're roughing it without actually giving up hot water and Wi-Fi. She parked, sat in her car for a moment, then finally got out. And there he was, Ryan Parker. Tall, built like a guy who spent just enough time outdoors to impress people but not enough to actually belong there. He wore one of those Ranger-issued jackets like it made him somebody. Amy walked right up to him, smiling, standing too close. He grinned, that easy, thoughtless kind of grin, then kissed her like he had every right to. I watched from a distance, every movement clear as day. The way she leaned into him, the way he rested a hand on her hip, comfortable, like he'd done it plenty of times before. Could have walked up right then. Could have called her name and watched her face drain of color. Could have broken his nose with one clean hit. But that would have been sloppy. Would have put me on their level. Instead, I watched, memorizing everything. The way they moved, the way they talked, the way she laughed like she hadn't done in years with me. I let them think they were safe. Then I drove away. There's a difference between reacting and acting. Weak men react. They see their woman cheating, and they punch a wall, throw a fit, maybe even beg. But real men, they take their time. They make a plan. And I was about to make one hell of a plan. I spent the next few weeks doing what I did best, watching, waiting, learning every detail before making my move. I wasn't just going to confront them and walk away. That wasn't enough. People like Amy and Ryan needed consequences. Ones they wouldn't see coming. Ones they'd feel for years. Amy carried on like she always had, spinning her little web of lies, thinking she was clever. She still told me she was heading to the gym, still used Lisa's name as her cover. But I knew exactly where she was going. And Ryan, he was cocky, but not careful. He had no idea I'd started digging into his life, into his past, into the cracks he didn't even know he had. Turns out, Ryan wasn't the golden boy he pretended to be. I pulled up old reports, talked to a few people, and found out he had a history of cutting corners on the job. A couple of hikers had gone missing under his watch last year. He ignored protocol, didn't report it right away, and by the time search teams got out there, one of them was dead. It was brushed under the rug. Rangers protect their own, but the people in charge hadn't forgotten. They were just waiting for another mistake. I made sure they got one. A few calls, a couple of well-placed anonymous tips, and suddenly Ryan was under scrutiny. Officials were taking a closer look at his records, questioning his leadership. It wouldn't take much to push him over the edge, to get him rattled enough to make another mistake. While that played out, I worked on Amy. Not directly. She wasn't worth another second of my emotions. But quietly, methodically. I made sure my finances were secure, transferred everything that mattered into accounts she couldn't touch. I stopped engaging in her meaningless conversations, stopped reacting to her little provocations. That was the thing about people like her. When you stop giving them attention, they panic. One night, she came home late, later than usual. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sharpening my hunting knife, slow and steady. She hesitated in the doorway, like she wasn't sure whether to come in or not. "Hey," she said, a little too brightly, setting her keys down on the counter. "Long day." I didn't look up. Something like that. She stood there, shifting her weight, waiting for me to ask about her day. I didn't. After a few seconds, she let out a small laugh, forced and awkward. "You okay? You've been quiet lately." I met her eyes finally, held them just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Have I?" She blinked, swallowed. "Yeah, I don't know. You just seem different." I set the knife down on the table, the sound sharp against the wood. "Maybe I am." Her smile faltered, but she forced it back. "Well, I'm gonna go shower." I nodded once, slow, and watched her walk away. She was nervous. Good. The next morning, I took my coffee out to the porch like always. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows over the land. Boomer sat beside me, ears perked, watching the woods. Smart dog. He knew when something was shifting. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the news, and there it was: Yellowstone officials had launched an internal investigation into ranger misconduct. No names yet, but I didn't need them. I already knew how this would end. Ryan's world was starting to crumble. Amy's was next. A week later, I got the call I'd been expecting. Ryan Parker was on the ropes. Word had gotten around that he was under investigation and the higher-ups were looking to make an example out of someone. It didn't take much: a few testimonies about his recklessness, a review of past incidents, and suddenly he wasn't the untouchable ranger he thought he was. He'd been put on leave pending further inquiry, which was just a polite way of saying they were going to find a way to get rid of him. I took my time with the next step. Rushing wasn't my style. Amy had started acting strange, not just guilty, but anxious, restless. She wasn't as quick to leave the house anymore, didn't vanish for hours at a time. I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, studying me the way someone studies a dark alley before they walk down it. One evening she set her phone down on the counter and turned to me. "You've been distant lately." I sipped my coffee, not looking up from the book I was reading. "Have I?" She let out a small, nervous laugh. "Yeah, you have. You're not talking much. You're not—" she hesitated, like she was trying to find the right words. "You're not acting like yourself." I turned a page. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I don't know, you don't ask me where I've been anymore." "You don't—" she stopped, biting her lip. "You don't seem like you care." I set the book down, met her eyes. "Should I?" She flinched just a little. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. "Just a question." She stared at me, waiting for something, but I gave her nothing. She swallowed, forcing another laugh. "God, you're acting weird." "I'm fine." She wanted to keep pushing, I could see it in her face, but something about the way I was looking at her made her stop. She picked up her phone, mumbled something about taking a shower, and left the room. I waited for the sound of running water before getting up and walking over to the counter where she'd left her phone. It took 2 seconds to type in the passcode she still didn't know I had figured out. Ryan had texted her 3 times. "Ryan, we need to talk." "Ryan, you've heard what's happening, right?" "Ryan, Amy, answer your damn phone." I smiled. He was slipping. I put the phone back exactly how she left it and sat down, waiting. The next day, I decided it was time for a face-to-face with the man himself. I drove out to one of the local spots where I knew he'd show up, an old diner on the edge of town where park employees like to grab breakfast. Sure enough, there he was, sitting alone at the counter, stirring his coffee like he had bigger problems than cream and sugar. I walked in slow, deliberate, making sure he saw me before I sat down in the stool next to him. He stiffened, eyes flicking over to me, but I just signaled the waitress. "Coffee black?" Ryan exhaled through his nose. "What do you want, man?" I didn't answer right away, just let the silence settle between us. The waitress set my coffee down and I took a slow sip before speaking. "Heard you've been having a rough week." His jaw clenched. "None of your business." I smirked. "No, I suppose it isn't." I set my cup down and turned my head to look at him. "But my wife? That is my business." His shoulders tensed. He didn't say anything. I leaned in just slightly. "Tell me something, Parker. Did you really think this was going to end well for you?" He scoffed, but it was weak. "What the hell are you talking about?" I tilted my head, studying him. "You're not as careful as you think you are." Ryan swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I don't know what you I placed my hand on the counter, slow and steady, feeling the wood creak beneath my weight. "You do. You know exactly what I'm saying. And if you were smart, you'd stop talking." For a second, I thought he might try something, but he didn't have it in him. He wasn't the kind of man who thrived under pressure. He was the kind who ran. I finished my coffee, stood up, and tossed a few bills on the counter. Before I walked out, I glanced back at him. "By the way, I'd start looking for a new job. Just some friendly advice." I didn't wait for a response. By the time I got home, Amy was waiting for me. She was sitting at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't taken a sip of. She looked up as I walked in, something guarded in her eyes. "Where were you?" she asked. "Town." "Doing what?" I shut the door behind me, took off my jacket, hung it up. "Had some business to take care of." She frowned, shifting in her seat. "Curtis?" She hesitated, then forced a laugh. "You're really creeping me out lately." I walked past her to the fridge, grabbed a beer, popped the cap. Yeah. You're all, I don't know, quiet, intense. It's like you're watching me or something. I took a long sip, let the silence stretch, then met her eyes. "Should I be?" She flinched, just a little. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. "Just a question." She swallowed, looking away. I don't know what's going on with you, but I feel like you're trying to intimidate me or something. I smirked, taking another sip. You feeling intimidated? She let out a breath, pushing back her chair abruptly. I'm going to bed. I nodded, watching her go. She was nervous. Good. The cracks were showing now. I just had to make sure they shattered. Amy was unraveling. I could see it in the way she moved around the house. Jumpy, distracted, constantly checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. She wasn't as careful with her lies anymore, slipping up on small details, correcting herself too quickly. She didn't know what was coming, but she felt it, like an animal that senses a storm before it breaks. Ryan was in free fall. The internal investigation had dug up enough dirt to put his career on life support, and I knew he was scrambling. I hadn't spoken to him since the diner, but I didn't need to. He was a man backed into a corner, and men like him don't handle pressure well. They lash out, make mistakes. He would take himself down. I was just helping him along. That afternoon, I watched Amy pace the kitchen, phone in hand, typing, deleting, typing again. Then she set it down, ran a hand through her hair, and let out a shaky breath. She hadn't even noticed me standing in the doorway. Something on your mind? I asked. She spun around so fast you'd think I'd fired a gun. Jesus, Curtis. She let out a breath, pressing a hand to her chest. You scared me. I stepped into the room, slow, deliberate, the way I would if I were tracking a wounded animal. Didn't mean to. I nodded toward the phone. Expecting a call? Her fingers twitched toward it before she forced them still. No. Just... Lisa texted me. I walked past her, grabbed a beer from the fridge, took my time popping the cap. Lisa, huh? Yeah. She shifted her weight, forcing a laugh. She's, going through some stuff. I took a sip, let the silence stretch between us. That right. Amy wet her lips, eyes darting to her phone again. Look, Curtis, I feel like... She stopped, gathering herself. I feel like something's wrong between us. I raised a brow, amused. That so? She crossed her arms, shoulders tense. Yeah, you're acting weird. You don't talk to me like you used to. You don't even seem... She hesitated, then sighed. I just feel like you're mad at me. I took another sip, watching her. Should I be? She blinked, shifting her weight again. What? I set the beer down, leaning on the counter. Should I be mad at you, Amy? For half a second, there was nothing but silence. Then she let out a nervous laugh, shaking her head. I don't even know what that means. I tilted my head, studying her. Sure you do. She swallowed hard. Curtis, what the hell are you trying to say? I leaned in just slightly. I think you know exactly what I'm saying. Her breath hitched, her fingers tightening around her arms. No, she said too quickly. I don't. I let that sit for a moment, then smirked, stepping back. Good to know. She stared at me like she was looking at a stranger. God, you're being so weird, creepy, even. She let out a breath, grabbing her phone. I'm going for a drive. I nodded, watching her head for the door. As soon as she was gone, I pulled out my own phone and dialed a number I'd been saving for the right moment. Margaret picked up on the second ring. Curtis. Her voice was warm but cautious. She knew I wasn't one for casual calls. Margaret, I said, leaning against the counter. We need to talk. It's about Amy. The pause on the other end told me she already had a feeling where this was going. What happened? I took a slow breath, keeping my voice even. She's been lying to you. Another pause, then a quiet, go on. I told her everything, not in a dramatic way, not in anger, just the facts. The affair, the deception, how she'd been sneaking around behind my back like I was too dumb to see it. I could hear Margaret's breathing change, could picture her sitting up straighter, jaw tightening. That girl, she muttered. She always had a selfish streak, but I never thought she'd do something like this. I let the silence sit for a second, then said, she needs to hear it from you, not me. Margaret exhaled, long and sharp. You're right. She does. That was all I needed. Amy thought she was untouchable. Thought she could lie her way through anything, smooth things over, keep her little secrets. But family was different. Amy had always relied on Margaret's approval, had always looked up to her. And Margaret? She didn't tolerate dishonor. By the time Amy got home, her world was already starting to crack. I was sitting on the porch when she pulled up, watching the last bit of sunlight fade over the trees. She slammed the car door harder than necessary, stomped toward the house, then stopped when she saw me. Her face was pale, her hands clenched at her sides. You told her. I took a sip of my beer, slow and steady. Told who? She let out a sharp breath, eyes flashing. Margaret called me. She knows, Curtis. She knows everything. I nodded, unfazed. Good. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked like she wanted to scream, but she didn't. She just stood there, shaking her head. Why would you do that? I set the beer down on the porch railing, standing up. Because you deserved it. She swallowed, blinking hard, like she was trying to keep herself together. You don't understand, I cut her off, stepping past her toward the door. I understand just fine, Amy. I turned, looking her dead in the eye. I understand exactly who you are now. She didn't have a response to that. For the first time since this whole thing started, she looked small. I walked inside without another word, leaving her standing in the cold. Amy barely spoke to me the next day. She moved around the house like a ghost, silent, stiff, avoiding eye contact. She was shaken, but not in the way someone feels guilt. No, she was panicked. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, just sorry she'd been caught. And worse, she knew the fallout wasn't over. Margaret wasn't just a relative, she was a cornerstone in the family, someone whose opinion carried weight. If Margaret had turned on her, others would follow. Amy's world was built on appearances, on being liked, on having people in her corner. And now, piece by piece, that was being taken from her. She sat across from me at breakfast, stirring her coffee but never drinking it. I read the paper, ignoring the tension so thick it might as well have been another person in the room. Finally, she broke the silence. Are you trying to ruin my life? Her voice was tight, controlled. I turned a page, calm. Don't need to. You did that yourself. Her jaw clenched, fingers gripping the mug. I made a mistake. I raised an eyebrow. Which one? Lying? Cheating? Or thinking you get away with it? She flinched. Good. I folded the paper and set it aside, meeting her eyes. You had a good thing, Amy. And you threw it away for what? Some thrill? Some guy who can't even keep his own life together. Her face flushed, her hand tightening around the mug. You don't understand. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. Then explain it to me. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then let out a breath and looked away. It just happened. I let that hang in the air, shaking my head. Nothing just happens. You made choices. Every lie, every text, every time you left this house pretending you were somewhere else, you chose that. She swallowed hard. I just wanted. What? Excitement. I scoffed. You wanted adventure, Amy? Then you should have married a fool, not a man who sees through every game you play. Her lip trembled just for a second before she steadied herself. And what now, Curtis? What do you want? I let the question sit, watching her shift under my gaze. Then I stood, grabbed my empty plate, and walked to the sink. I want you gone. Her breath hitched. You can't. I turned back, calm and steady. I can. And I have. She stared at me, brows furrowed. I walked past her, pulled open a drawer, and tossed a thick envelope onto the table. She flinched at the sound of it hitting the wood. What is that? She asked, voice quieter now. I took a sip of coffee, watching her. Divorce papers. Her throat bobbed. Curtis, please, No, I cut her off. You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't real regret, just desperation. I didn't buy them, didn't care. I walked past her, grabbing my jacket. Sign them by the end of the week, I said, opening the door. Or don't. Either way, I'm done. I stepped outside, the cold air crisp and sharp, filling my lungs. Boomer trotted up to me, tail wagging, sensing the shift. I scratched behind his ears, looking out toward the trees. Behind me, the door stayed open for a few seconds longer before she finally closed it. It was over. Later that evening, I got a text from an old friend in the park service. Ryan's out. Fired. He's done. I read the message, exhaled slowly, then put my phone away. The next morning, Amy packed her things and left without a word. I didn't watch her go. Didn't need to. I was already looking ahead. A month later, I signed the final papers. The lawyer handed them to me, neat and official, Amy's signature right where it needed to be. It was done. No more shared accounts, no more ties. She was nothing to me now. I left the office without looking back, stepped into the cold Montana air, and took a deep breath. It felt lighter than it had in years. Amy didn't stick around town. Word spread fast, and after Margaret cut ties, others followed. The invitations dried up, the friendly smiles turned wary. People might not have known all the details, but they knew she gambled away a good man for something cheap and temporary. She tried staying with Lisa for a while, but even Lisa had limits. Last I heard, she was renting a tiny apartment in Bozeman, working extra shifts at the gym to cover rent. The big adventure she chased had shrunk to 4 walls and bills she couldn't keep up with. Ryan? He was worse off. With the Park Service job gone, he drifted. No steady work, no references worth a damn, just a bad reputation that followed him wherever he went. I heard he took a job hauling gear for a fly fishing tour company, scraping by, a long way from the ranger badge he used to wear like a trophy. I figured he'd be out of Montana before long. Some men can't face the wreckage they cause. Me? I bought a new place, deeper into the mountains, away from the noise. A stretch of land big enough for Boomer to run, with a river cutting through the back and a porch wide enough to sit and watch the seasons change. Paid for it in full. No mortgage, no strings. Just mine. One evening I was out on that porch, beer in hand, watching the sun dip below the tree line. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke, the kind of clean that settles deep in your lungs. Boomer lay at my feet, stretched out, belly full from a fresh meal. It was quiet, the way I liked it. No buzzing phone, no half-hearted conversations, no one lying through their teeth. Margaret called once, checking in. "You doing all right, Curtis?" I took a sip of beer, let the silence sit for a second. "Better than ever." She exhaled, a little relieved. "You deserved better than that mess." "I know." Another pause. "So, what now?" I looked out at the land, at the trees swaying easy in the breeze, at the open sky stretching wide and endless. Now? I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of it all settle just right. Now I live. And I did.